Hello and thank you for watching. This is a short presentation concerning the expulsion of the Moriscos from Spain in 1609, and particularly what happened to their children, known as the Morisquillos. The title is When Children Were Sold into Slavery in Javea. When the Catholic monarchs Isabel and Ferdinand received the surrender of Granada in 1492, the Muslim population of Spain were given freedom to stay in the country, freedom of worship, and for minor offences could be judged under Islamic law. The Catholic Church at this stage saw conversion to Christianity as being voluntary and encouraged by education. However, attitudes started to change with the expulsion of the Jews from Spain later in 1492, and hardened even further when Cardinal Cisneros became the Archbishop of Toledo in 1495. He proved to be very influential over Isabel, and more forced conversions took place. Then in 1519 it was decreed that Muslims had to convert to Christianity or leave the country. In fact, very few left. This had been their home and the home of their ancestors for 800 years. They knew nowhere else, so many converted to Christianity or pretended to convert to Christianity. Throughout the century there was an uneasy truce. The Moriscos, as the converts became to be known, pretending to adopt Christianity, and the authorities pretending that indeed they had. But more and more pressure was brought to bear on the Moriscos to leave their old beliefs and rituals behind and fully adopt a Christian life. During the century, there were many outbreaks of rebellion, and the anti-Muslim sentiment that had been evident throughout the Reconquista worsened, and a hatred from both sides developed. Finally, in 1609, a pivotal moment arrived, and the Crown issued an edict on the 23rd of September, giving all Moriscos, converted or not, to leave Spain within 3 days. Commissioners toured the countryside where most of the Moriscos lived on small farmsteads, issued the edict and directed them to ports, allowing them to take only the possessions that they could carry. What we now know today as the Comunidad of Valencia had a significant Morisco population of around 130,000, which represented about 30% of the total population. Most of them were tenant farmers, working land owned by the Valencian nobility, high in the mountains where nobody else had the skills or the hard work to make a living from those difficult areas. Over 120,000 of them left, 42,000 of them through the ports of Denia and Javea. The economic impact on the region was catastrophic, with no one left to work the land and no tax to pay to the nobility. But how did 94 Morisco children come to be living in Christian households in Javea in 1611, 2 years after the expulsion? The expulsion order itself gave the opportunity to Moriscos to voluntarily leave behind children under the age of 12. The church argued that young innocents could not be accused of being infidels. However, it's very unlikely that a Morisco family would leave their young children behind. The 3-day journey from farmstead to the port was a traumatic experience for the Moriscos. Foreign mercenaries and local militia forces were wandering the countryside, taking the opportunity to plunder whatever they could find. These spoils of war were seen by the Crown as part of their compensation. However, the Moriscos had little material wealth. Their homes had been either stolen by local people or confiscated by the nobility, so the only thing of value that remained was people. Within those people was a very strict hierarchy of value. Firstly children, second women, thirdly young strong men. During the forced march to the coast, the soldiers and militia took every opportunity to extract money from the desperate Moriscos. Payment for food, payment for water, even payment to take shelter. The Moriscos had no money and nothing to trade apart from the services of their women and their children. Central to this were the local Christian militia. In 1596, a register of all men in Valencia aged between 18 and 40 was made. It was seen as a backup defence of Valencia in the event of pirate attacks from the Barbary coast. A series of watchtowers were built on the coast, for example very close to Javea at Granadella and Ambolo. And in the end, something like 15% of the Christian population were members of the militia, so quite a sizable force. During the expulsion process, the militia were instructed to arrest any Morisco found after 3 days and to kill any of them that resisted arrest. This was of course carte blanche for the militia to pillage, rape and murder. There was some Morisco resistance, and in this area very close to Javea, 17,000 Moriscos took refuge at Cavalverde, a rocky peak at the entrance to the Val de l'Agua. The job of clearing Cavalverde was given to the militia of Bocarent, a town in the interior of Alicante province, aided by foreign mercenaries from Naples who had disembarked in Javea on September the 21st. Cavalverde was a bloodbath. Many Morisco women chose to commit suicide and kill their own children at the same time by jumping off the high cliffs rather than succumbing to the troops. But many of the children were captured, and the governor of Denia at the time, Cristobal Sendeño, noted the high volume of children brought to the port by soldiers and then sold for figures in today's value of between 1,000 and 5,000 euros. It was mainly affluent people who bought them, and of course the Bocarent militia knew full well that the value of these children was much higher on the rich coastal towns of Denia and Javea than it was in the towns of the interior, so rich people there bought them as unpaid workers and servants. Of course today one is shocked by the concept of child slavery, but in medieval times it was not unusual and had often been used as a spoil of war by both Christian and Muslim authorities in the previous centuries. In 1611, the Crown decided to undertake a census of where the Morisquillos, the Morisco children, were living, though not through any sociological interest, but simply so they could tax the owners. In total, 2,447 children were found in Valencia, and 1,054 of those had been found, in inverted commas, in the Val de l'Agua or the Val de Pop. In Javea, there were 94 children reported. At the time, Javea had around 450 families, so around 1 in 5 had a Morisquillo. The registers were quite detailed, and information has been extracted from them, as you can see on the screen, which is a modern-day representation of the information that was in the survey. 34 children had marks on their faces. These were possibly a form of branding put there by parents who hoped to return and find their children later. 20 had evidence of smallpox and 2 had ringworm. The census also noted the names of the owners, the new Christian names of the children rather than their original Muslim names, their ages, and from where they were taken. If you look at Valencia as a whole, you can see on the chart on the screen the towns where the Morisquillos were found in 1611. Obviously the city of Valencia had the most. It was the major city of the region and a major port. Other major ports where the Morisquillos ended up being sold were Denia, Olivar, Alicante, and then Javea, which actually had more than Gandia, which is another port on the coast. After that, it's the larger towns in the interior. When looking at this whole story, it is reasonable assumption to make that there must be a high percentage of Moorish or North African DNA in the Spanish population today. In fact, it is quite low, around 5%. The Moors that arrived in 711 were not part of a mass migration, but were a relatively small but powerful military and governing force. Of course, over time they married into the local Ibero-Romano population, and by the 13th century something like 90% of the population of the country was Muslim. But in physical terms they look no different in the Muslim-occupied parts of the country than the people in the Christian kingdoms of the north. The DNA of all the people was largely a result of Celtic and Northern and Central European migration many centuries before. But in Javea today, how many people have a captured child slave as an ancestor? Thank you for listening and watching. If you liked it, please press like, and why not subscribe to my channel for more history talks. Thank you.